Welcome back for the afternoon session. Good to see you all. Have you gotten your oranges today? Popcorn? Don't forget about coming tomorrow. There might be another surprise. You never know. We are going to study lesson or chapter number 8. Chapter number 8, it's page 211. How many of you read this chapter? Yeah. 5 or 6. That's not a bad percentage out of 40. But anyway, let's have a word of prayer to begin the session this afternoon, and then we'll get right into this lesson. Father in heaven, thank you for the good time of rest that we've been able to have between the morning session and the afternoon session. We thank you that we are able to come back to open your word in a time where the world is in turmoil over this virus that can cause what even wars can't cause. We are comforted by your word, that you're sitting on the throne. Everything is under your control. And we know that if we commit our lives to you, you will be with us all the way till the end. So we ask that as we continue to study, that your Holy Spirit will be present with us to enlighten our minds and open our hearts. We want to understand your word so that we can share it with others. So be with us, Lord. Bless us and keep us in your care. We pray in Jesus' precious name. Amen. All right, you say, why are we going to take a look at Matthew and Luke? Well, because Matthew and Luke are related to Revelation chapter 11 and verse 2. So we have to take a look at that as well. So let's go to page 211. A study of the two witnesses of Revelation 11 would not be complete unless we take some time to study parallel passages in Matthew 24 and Luke chapter 21. These chapters bear directly on what we have been studying in the last couple of sessions. So let's go to Matthew chapter 24, and I want you to notice that in this chapter there are 4 sequential signs. There are several signs, but 4 that I want to focus on. The first sign is the destruction of earthly Jerusalem. We find that in verses 15 through 20. Now you're going to have to read the verses at your leisure to follow along. I can only give you the summary now. The second sign that is mentioned in Matthew chapter 24 is a period of tribulation. The third sign that is mentioned is signs in the sun and in the moon. By the way, the period of tribulation is described in verses 21 to 28. The signs in the sun and moon are described in verse 29. And then the final sign is that the powers in the heavens will be shaken when the Son of Man appears. So those are the 4 central signs of Matthew 24. The destruction of earthly Jerusalem, a period of tribulation, signs in the sun and moon, and the powers in the heavens are shaken when the Son of Man appears. Now, when you compare the parallel passage in Luke, because Luke 21 describes the same basic ideas of Matthew 24, when you go to Luke 21, there appear to be only 3 signs and not 4. What are the 3 signs? The destruction of earthly Jerusalem, that's verses 20 to 24. Signs in the sun, moon, and stars, that's verse 25. And the powers of heaven will be shaken at the coming of the Son of Man, that's verses 25 and 26. So the question is, which sign is missing in Luke that is found in Matthew 24? It is the tribulation sign. Luke does not mention any tribulation sign. However, the question is the tribulation really missing in Luke chapter 21? The answer is no. Luke simply describes the tribulation sign differently than Matthew does. Basically, the tribulation sign is described in Luke as the Gentiles trampling the holy city. Now you see the reason why this is related to Revelation 11 verse 2, because you have a trampling of the holy city. Now, let's go to our next section. This is page 212. One thing is clear from the first part of Luke 21 and verse 24. In fact, let's go there now and read that verse. Luke 21 and verse 24. And let's see what fact is clear there in this particular verse. It says there, and they, this is the Jews, will fall by the edge of the sword and led away captive into all nations. And you'll notice in the New King James Version, there's a period there, right? Which makes the separation. So, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And then I want you to notice the second part of the verse. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Is that, does it have any relationship with Revelation 11 verse 2? Very clearly. Instead of 42 months, you have the expression, the times of the Gentiles, right? And you have a mention of Jerusalem also. So, you'll notice here in Luke chapter 21 and verse 24, that you have the literal destruction of the literal city of Jerusalem and its literal temple in the first half of Matthew chapter 21 and verse 24. This is the part where it says, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations, period. On the other hand, the second part of Luke 21 verse 24 describes the trampling of spiritual Jerusalem by spiritual Gentiles during a symbolic period. In other words, Luke chapter 21 verse 24 is speaking about two tramplings of Jerusalem. The first refers to literal Jerusalem. The second half of the verse refers to spiritual Jerusalem. Now, let's notice what principle we are applying here. Louis Weir, whom has some really fantastic material, we have many books of his here at Secrets Unsealed in our store, expresses this principle of how we can say that Matthew 21 verse 24, the first half of the verse describes the literal destruction of Jerusalem, whereas the second half describes the period of the trampling of spiritual Jerusalem by the Gentiles for 42 months. Here's the principle. In his book, The King of the North at Jerusalem, page 75, he wrote, when passing over into the Christian era, there is an automatic transition from what? From literal to spiritual Babylon. Is Revelation's Babylon the literal city over in Iraq? No, of course not. It is a spiritual global system, right? The harlot is seated on many waters. All nations, tongues, and multitudes follow the harlot. Babylon at the end of time is global. In the Old Testament, when Israel is God's literal people, Babylon is what? Literal. Very important principle. The statement continues, when passing over into the Christian era, there is an automatic transition from literal to spiritual Babylon, from literal to spiritual what? Jerusalem, from literal lands of Israel and Babylon to their spiritual antitypes. What is a spiritual antitype of Babylon? The papacy. What is the spiritual antitype of Jerusalem? The saints of the Most High. Aren't those the two enemies in Daniel 7 and Revelation 13? Absolutely. So, what is Jerusalem in the period of the Christian church? It's a church. What is Jerusalem when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. It is literal Jerusalem. So if we're dealing with literal Jerusalem, Jerusalem is literal. If we're dealing with spiritual Jerusalem, Jerusalem, of course, is symbolic. Are you understanding the principle? By the way, when did probation close for the literal Jewish nation? In the year 34, when Stephen was stoned. There you transition to what? To the Christian church, which is now Jerusalem. Not literal Jerusalem. Symbolic or spiritual Jerusalem. Now let's go to the bottom of page 212. When the second part of Luke 21, verse 24, describes the trampling of Jerusalem, it is not referring to what? To the physical city of brick and mortar. Jesus is what? Personifying the city. He's treating the city as a person, in other words. Notice the following text that use the word Jerusalem to refer to the people in the city. 2 Kings 24, verses 14 and 15. Speaking about Nebuchadnezzar, when he conquered Jerusalem, it says, and he carried into captivity all Jerusalem. Wow, pretty difficult to transfer the whole physical city to Babylon, right? What does it mean when it says he carried into captivity all Jerusalem? It's the people of Jerusalem. All the captains. Now you have the definition. All the mighty men of valor. 10,000 captives. And all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained except the poorest people of the land. So Jerusalem is defined as the what? As the people that live in the city. Jesus in Luke 19, 41 to 44 said something similar. Jesus is descending the Mount of Olives to Jerusalem to enter the temple for the final times of his ministry. And we're told there, now as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known, even you, who is he talking to? The city. So, can a city really hear what he's saying? Once again, Jerusalem refers to what? To the inhabitants. Now as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known, even you especially this in your day, the things that make for your peace. However, now they are hidden from your eyes. For days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you, surround you, and close you in on every side, and level you and your children within you. So it's not only the physical city, but what? The children that live there. Your children within you to the ground. And they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not know the time of your visitation. So what is Jerusalem? In the Old Testament, Jerusalem is the population of Jerusalem. In the church age, what is Jerusalem? It is the members of the Christian church. It is globalized, if you please. Notice also Matthew 23, 37 to 39. Once again, Jesus personifies Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. So it's the children, right? That is the city. But you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, he's speaking about Jerusalem, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So far, so good? Clear? Okay. Now, let's go to the four key elements in Luke 21, verse 24, the second half of the verse, and Revelation 11, verse 2. What do these two verses have in common? Is there a mention of Jerusalem in both? Yes. Yes. Is there a mention of trampling in both? Yes. Is there a mention of Gentiles in both? Is there a mention of times in both? Yes. In Luke, it is the times of the Gentiles, whereas in the book of Revelation, it is specified as what? 42 months. So what are the times of the Gentiles? The times of the Gentiles are 42 months. Now let's notice Revelation 11, verses 2 and 3. This is what we already studied earlier today. However, leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it. For it has been given, is the usual way that it was translated, but we notice that the better translation is what? For it was given to the Gentiles. When was it given to the Gentiles? In what year? In the year 538. It was given to the Gentiles. And what would the Gentiles do after 538? And they will tread the holy city. What is the holy city? What is the holy city? Yeah, Jerusalem. What kind of Jerusalem? Spiritual Jerusalem. Because here we're in the Christian age. We're no longer dealing with literal Israel. We're dealing with the Christian age. Now let's read once again Revelation 11 verse 2 and 3. However, leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it. For it was given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Are the 42 months and the 1,260 days the same period? Yes, they are the same period. Now, here comes a key point. When John wrote Revelation 11 verse 2, at the end of the 1st century, it is believed that John wrote the book of Revelation around the year 95 AD. When was the city of Jerusalem destroyed? In the year 70. So the city had already been destroyed for how long? At least for 25 years. So when John wrote Revelation 11 verse 2, at the end of the 1st century, the Romans had destroyed the literal city of Jerusalem, and it had been in ruins for 25 years. So can Revelation 11 verse 2 apply to literal Jerusalem? No. The Gentiles had already taken the Jews captive. So this cannot refer to the trampling of the literal city of Jerusalem in the year 70 AD. Even the literal treading down of the outer sanctuary had taken place more than 42 months before John's time. So even if you take the 42 months as being literal, that doesn't amount to 25 years. Implying that the number was what? It can't be a literal number, because Jerusalem was destroyed 25 years before. So even if you say 42 months before John wrote, that's only 3.5 years. So it doesn't square. So once again, even the literal treading down of the outer sanctuary had taken place more than 42 months before John's time. Implying, this is a proof of the year-day principle, implying that the number was what? Symbolic for the whole period from its devastation in some sense until its what? Until its restoration. So Revelation 11 verse 2 contains the very same 4 elements that Jesus mentioned in Luke 21 verse 24, the second half of the verse. Holy city, Jerusalem, trampling, Gentiles, and 42 months. It refers to the times of the Gentiles. Are we on a good track here? Yes. Good. Now, who are the Gentiles that are mentioned here? Remember we talked about the Gentiles this morning? Remember we read from Albert Barnes, the Bible commentator? Who did he say the Gentiles were? The Roman Catholic papacy. And he was right on target, wasn't he? Who are the Gentiles? And what does the word Jerusalem mean? We have already pointed out that Jerusalem during the Christian dispensation refers to God's faithful church. We did that this morning. And Gentiles refers to those who are enemies of Christ's faithful church. And then you can read all of these texts that we have here. We don't have time to read all of these texts, but I hope that when you get home, you'll sit down and read all of these verses that I have in parentheses. We just can't go through all of them. Next paragraph. In Revelation 11 verse 1, the angel told John to measure what? The temple and those who worship in it. Now we're going, Revelation 11 verse 1, does that belong with chapter 11? No. What does it belong with? Revelation chapter 10. It's a conclusion to Revelation 10. You say, how do you know that? Well, let me just summarize. We're going to study Revelation 10 in detail. But Revelation 10 ends by the angel telling John, you must prophesy again to nations, tongues, peoples, and kings. Okay? And then, in the very next verse, you have the measuring of the temple. Are you following the sequence? So, you know, the prophet, that great disappointment in 1844, the experience that was sweet and then turned bitter, God says, you must prophesy again, of course with new understanding. So what began immediately after the great disappointment? What great insight did Hiram Edson have the very next day as he was crossing a field with one of his friends? He says, I saw distinctly and clearly that instead of Jesus coming to the earth on October 22, 1844, he entered from the holy to the most holy place. Is that measuring the temple? So does Revelation 11 verse 1 belong with chapter 10? Yeah, it speaks about what we are to prophesy again about. We're supposed to prophesy again about the measuring of the temple, which is the judgment. The hour of his judgment has come, the first angel's message. Are we going okay? Now, in Revelation 11:1, the angel told John to measure the temple and those who worship in it, but not to measure the court, because it was given to the Gentiles for 42 months. When John wrote the book of Revelation, Rome had already destroyed the literal temple, and the literal Jews had been scattered among the nations. This means that the temple referred to here must be the one where? It must be the one in heaven. And the worshipers must be those who worship there what? Spiritually. Let me ask you, can we worship in heaven? Can we come boldly to the throne of grace in heaven? Can we enter the sanctuary in heaven? How? By faith. Spiritually, we can enter. Spiritual Jerusalem can worship in heaven by faith. So, basically, we are to understand that the temple is the heavenly sanctuary literally, and the church, what? Symbolically or spiritually. Now, there's not only a link between Revelation 11, verses 2 and 3, and Luke chapter 24 and 21 and verse 24, the second half of the verse. There's also a link between Revelation 11, 2 and 3, and Daniel 7 and 8. This is where it's going to become even clearer. Let's pursue that. According to Revelation 11, verse 2, the trampling of the city occurs for a period of how long? 42 months. Also described in the next verse, that is verse 3, as what? 1,260 days. Don't forget this. So, are the 1260 days and the 42 months the same period? Expressed with different terminology? Yes. Now notice, this links the 42 months of verse 2 with the 1,260 days of verse 3. I'm going to go slow because this is critically important. Furthermore, even more, it links Revelation 11, 2 and 3 with the 1,260 days of Revelation what? 12:14. Let's go there to Revelation chapter 12 and verse 14. So is there a connection between Revelation 11, 2 and 3, Luke chapter 21, verse 24, the second half of the verse, and Revelation 12, verse 14? Yes. Let's notice Revelation 12 and verse 14. Here the dragon is pursuing the woman. For how long? Well, let's read. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Now, let's go back to verse 6. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there. How long? 1,260 days. Is that the same period as Revelation 11, verses 2 and 3? Yes. Is it the times of the Gentiles? Yes. Absolutely. Now, let's continue here. Does Revelation 13, verse 5 also mention 42 months, which are mentioned there in Revelation 11, 2 and 3? Let's go to Revelation chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13, and let's read verse 5. This is speaking about the beast. What is the beast? The papacy. What is the little horn? The papacy. Now notice Revelation 13, verse 5. And he, that is the beast, was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for how long? To continue for 42 months. So notice the verses here where we have the bullet points. 42 months, Revelation 11:2. 1,260 days, Revelation 11:3. 1,260 days, Revelation 12:14. 42 months, Revelation 13 and verse 5. And did you notice we have times, and the dividing of time also there in Revelation chapter 12? Where do we find that also? In Daniel 7 verse 25. So here's my question. Is Revelation 11, 2 and 3, Luke, chapter 21 verse 24, the second part of the verse, Revelation chapter 12 verse 6 and verse 14, Revelation chapter 13 and verse 5, Daniel chapter 7 verse 25, are those verses addressing the very same powers? Yes. So now, you have a very interesting issue because, once again, the importance of the literary structure. Revelation chapter 12, for example, mentions that the dragon will persecute the woman for times, and the dividing of time. That's 538 to 1798. But now, wait a minute. Didn't we in chapter 11 study about the French Revolution? Well, that's in the 1790s. So is Revelation 11 and 12 in chronological order? No. They're not in chronological order. What is Revelation 12 doing? It is now going to go back and it's going to amplify some details that we have in Revelation 11. Revelation 13 mentions the 42 months. So there's still something to say in Revelation 13 that wasn't said in Revelation 12, that wasn't said in Revelation 11. Are you following me? This is the importance of the literary structure of the book of Revelation. Now let's continue, middle of the page 215. In order to understand Revelation 11, 2 and 3, we must go back to the Old Testament roots of this prophecy, and we find those roots where? In Daniel 7, 21 and 25. Daniel 8, 11 to 13, and Daniel 11, 31 to 35. In these verses, we find a power that tramples underfoot what? It tramples underfoot the temple of God, its true worshipers, not by the Roman Empire, but by what? By a rebellious little horn that introduced an idolatrous Christian worship that caused desolation. Let's go to Daniel chapter 8 for a moment, where the little horn is described. Daniel chapter 8. Is there an idea of trampling in Daniel chapter 8? Yes, the little horn. Is that the same little horn as Daniel 7? Yes. So notice Daniel chapter 7, and let's read beginning with verse 11. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host. Who is the prince of the host? Jesus. And by him, by the little horn, the daily was taken away. What is the daily? It's a continual ministration of Jesus, first in the court on earth, and then in the holy place of the sanctuary. So is this work that the little horn is doing having something to do with the sanctuary? Absolutely. It continues, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of the transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily, and he cast the truth to the ground. He did this all, and what? He did this all and prospered. So let's go down to verse 13. And I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices, the giving of both sanctuary and the host to be what? To be trampled underfoot. So does the little horn in Daniel 8 trample underfoot the sanctuary and the prince and the host? Yes. In Revelation 11, 2 and 3, is that what happens also? Trampling of Jerusalem? for the times of the Gentiles? Absolutely. Are all of these prophecies interrelated? They most certainly are. Now, let's go to the next point. According to Daniel 7, 21 and 25, this little horn blasphemed God and persecuted his people for times, and the dividing of time. So let's consider the historical framework of the little horn's work in Daniel 7. First of all, you have what in Daniel 7? You have a lion, which represents which kingdom? Babylon. Then you have a bear, the Medes and Persians. Then you have a leopard, Greece. Then you have a dragon beast, Rome. Then the dragon beast sprouts 10 horns. That is what came as a result of the barbarian invasions, the divisions of the Roman Empire. And then once the divisions are there, but this is well into the Christian period, isn't it? Because Rome by this point has fallen. The kingdom has been divided into 10 kingdoms. You have a little horn that rises, and then how long does that little horn rule? Times, and the dividing of time. Let's read it. Daniel 7:25. The little horn shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. So let me ask you, is Daniel 7 verse 25 connected with Revelation 11 verses 2 and 3? How about Revelation chapter 12 verse 6 and verse 14? How about Revelation 13 verse 5? How about Luke 21 and verse 24, the second part of the verse? They're all linked. They're all describing the identical same period. Let's continue here. Immediately after the nefarious work of the little horn, what begins in Daniel 7? The judgment sits and the books are opened. So immediately after the rule of the little horn, what begins? The judgment. The Father sits on his throne, and then the Son comes to the Father to receive his what? To receive his kingdom. What is his kingdom? The people that belong to the kingdom. How does he determine which people belong to his kingdom? He has to do a judgment. So notice, immediately after the work of the little horn, you have the judgment. So what would you expect after the 1260 days or the 42 months on which the Gentiles trampled upon Jerusalem? What would you expect next? Do you have to be King Solomon to figure it out? No. You would expect the judgment, right? So does Revelation chapter 11 tell us that after the period of the rule of the little horn, the temple was going to be measured? Absolutely. Such sequence is the same. So let's continue here. Immediately after the nefarious work of the little horn, the judgment in the heavenly temple begins. This order of events is very similar to Revelation 11, 1-3, where the measuring of the heavenly naos, that's the temple, follows the trampling of Jerusalem for 42 months. So the little horn rules times, and the dividing of time, after that the judgment. In Revelation chapter 11, the Gentiles trampled Jerusalem for 42 months, after that the measuring of the temple. You know, our idea of the investigative judgment is not some invention by Ellen G. White. Like many of these magazines on the fringes of Adventism say, not to mention them because this is going to be broadcast on television. I don't want to give them any free advertising. These verses prove that the measuring of the temple follows the trampling of the city, and not vice versa. Is my translation correct? Was given to the Gentiles in the light of everything we're studying? Absolutely. Now, continuing. Daniel 8 further amplifies the nefarious work of the little horn power by specifically saying that it trampled what? The sanctuary and the host. Language very similar to what? To Revelation 11 verses 2 and 3. Daniel 8 describes two distinct stages of the little horn power. One stage is horizontal and the other vertical. You see the little horn, there's only one little horn in Daniel 8 that illustrates both Romes, pagan Rome and papal Rome. At first, the little horn is conquering geographically, horizontally. But then, at some point, the little horn morphs. It morphs into a power that attacks heaven. Let's read the verses. Daniel 8, verse 9. And out of one of them, out of the four winds, into which the kingdom of Alexander the Great was divided. And out of one of them came a little horn which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. Does this have anything to do with an attack against heaven? No. Notice verses 10 to 13. We just read that. And it grew up to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host, some of the stars to the ground, and trampled them. Could this be possibly the reason why a third of the stars were eclipsed? He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host. In other words, he even attacks Jesus and his ministry in the sanctuary. And by him, that is by the little horn, the daily was taken away, which is the ministration of Jesus in the holy place. And the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of the transgression, an army was given. This is the state, by the way. An army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this, and what? Prospered. How long did it prosper? 42 months. 1,260 days. The times of the Gentiles. Times, and the dividing of time. Continues saying in verse 13, Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, How long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? What is the answer? Unto 2,300 days in the sanctuary will be cleansed. In other words, the judgment will what? The judgment will begin. Revelation 13, verses 1 and 2, and verses 5 through 7, also mention the 42 months. There the beast persecutes the saints, blasphemes the heavenly tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. Is that parallel to Daniel 8? Did the little horn of Daniel 8 persecute God's people, the saints? Yes. Did it blaspheme the heavenly tabernacle? Revelation 13 says that. The sequence of powers is identical to the one in Daniel 7. Lion, bear, leopard, dragon, 10 horns, and beast. Whereas in the Old Testament it was lion, bear, leopard, dragon, 10 horns, and little horn. In other words, little horn is the same as the beast. The inevitable conclusion is that this Jerusalem that is described in Revelation 11, 2 and 3 is the Christian era, is taking place in the Christian era after the demise of what? Of the Roman Empire. So are we dealing with literal Jerusalem in the second half of Luke 21, verse 24? No. It is another Jerusalem. It is spiritual Jerusalem. So you have here a link between Daniel 7 and 8 and Revelation 11 and 13. You have a lion, a bear, a leopard, a dragon, 10 horns, and then a beast that rules for 42 months. Let's read the verses. And he was given a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies. And he was given authority to continue how long? 42 months. Does that connect with Revelation 11, verses 2 and 3? Absolutely. Is the beast the same as the Gentiles? In Revelation 11, 2 and 3. Is the beast the same as the Gentiles? Is the little horn the same as the Gentiles? Absolutely. So was Albert Barnes right in what he said? Oh, you better believe it. Of course, he didn't realize the implications of what he was writing. It says, Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name and his what? Tabernacle. Is that what the little horn did in Daniel 8? Yes. And those who dwell in heaven. Did the little horn in Daniel 8 cast the stars to heaven, to the earth? Yeah, representing God's people. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. Now what about Daniel 7 and Revelation 12? Furthermore, Revelation 11 verse 3 bears a relationship with Revelation 12:14 because both refer, actually it should be Revelation chapter 12 verse 6, because both refer to what? to 1,260 days. Or is it the other way around? Let's see here. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 14. It's verse 6 and verse 14. Actually, verse 6 says, then the woman fled to the wilderness, that she should be there 1,260 days. So this should be Revelation 11:13 bears a close relationship with Revelation 12 verse 6, not Revelation 12 verse 14. So you need to make a correction there. Even further, the terminology of Revelation 12 and verse 6 shares a common language with Revelation 12:14. That should be 12:14 there. And Revelation 12:6 in turn has a connection with Daniel what? 7:25 by the common reference to time, times, and the dividing of time. Let's read those verses so we can catch the nuance very clearly. Revelation 12:13 and 14. Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. In verse 6, it says, this should be Revelation 12 verse 6, and the other one should be Revelation 12. You need to make those corrections there. And I'm sure Jeannie is writing this down. But anyway, Revelation chapter 12 says, then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there. How long? 1,260 days. So in Revelation 12, you have 1,260 days, and you have time, times, and the dividing of time. Where does that come from, time, times, and dividing of time? It comes from Daniel 7, verse 25. Let's read it. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Are you following me? So must we study Revelation 11, actually verse 2 through verse 6, which is describing the fourth trumpet, or the 1,260 years. Must we study that passage along with Luke 21:24, the second half of the verse, along with Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, Revelation chapter 12, and Revelation chapter 13. They're all describing the same event, the same power. Now, let's go to the middle of page 218. Therefore, we can safely reach the conclusion that the 3.5 times, the 1,260 days, and the 42 months are all parallel expressions. A careful study of these prophecies indicates clearly that their fulfillment took place during a 1,260-year period after the disintegration of the Roman Empire. This means that the Jerusalem spoken of in Luke 21 is not literal Jerusalem, but rather what? Spiritual Jerusalem, because literal Jerusalem had already been devastated by the year 70 AD. Now, once again, Albert Barnes. I wish that he had been here today. He didn't have all the light. You know, he wrote more than a century ago, actually. So notice what he wrote, right on target. The 42 months would embrace the whole period of the ascendancy and prevalence of the papacy. So did Albert Barnes believe in the year-day principle? Yeah. Of course he did. The Protestant reformers believed in the year-day principle. But you know where it disappeared? You need to read my book, Futurism's Incredible Journey. There I document why the Protestant world abandoned the year-day principle, because the Millerites used the year-day principle to say that Jesus was coming on October 22, 1844, and when Jesus did not come, they said the method was wrong. Sad. So, the 42 months would embrace the whole period of the ascendancy and prevalence of the papacy. Would that be more than 42 literal months? Of course. Or the whole time of the continuance of that corrupt domination in which Christendom was to be trodden down and corrupted by it. So according to him, Who are the Gentiles? The papacy. And what is Jerusalem? Christendom, right? And then he continues, thus regarded, this would properly express the time of the ascendancy of the papal power and the end of the 42 months, or 1260 years, would denote the time when the influence of that power would cease. In other words, it gives us a starting point and it gives us what? The ending point of the dominion of the papacy. Even the rocks will cry out. If Adventists don't see it, you know, the Lord uses people in other churches also that have gleams of light to help people say, well, those Adventists are not so crazy after all. Now, let's go to our final point in this segment. Thoughts on Daniel 9, 26 and 27. How many destructions of Jerusalem do you have in Daniel 9, 26 and 27? 2. You say, now wait a minute. Actually, there's 3. No, wait a minute. Let's read the verses. Daniel chapter 9, 26 and 27. Let's read the paragraph and then we'll go to those verses. We have reached the conclusion that the 2 halves of Luke 21, 24 describe 2 distinct tramplings of 2 different Jerusalems. The first half describes literal Jerusalem, trampled by the literal Romans. The second half of the verse describes the trampling of spiritual Jerusalem, that is the church, by spiritual Rome, that is the papacy. Revelation 11 verse 2 expands upon the second half of Luke 21 and verse 24. Now let's read Daniel 9, 26 and 27. You remember that God allowed it to the Jews how many weeks? 70 weeks. He says, I'm going to give you 70 more weeks of grace. This is your opportunity. And if you don't shape up, I'm going to ship you out. Is basically what he's saying. Now, notice Daniel 9:26. After the 62 weeks, and it's understood that it's the 62 plus the 7, which is 69, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. What is that referring to? The death of Jesus. And the people of the prince who is to come. Who are the people of the prince who is to come? Jews. The people are the Jews. And who is the prince? Jesus. Jesus. So did the people destroy their own city? Yep. And the people of the prince who is to come shall what? Destroy the city and the sanctuary. Which city and sanctuary? So at the end of the 70 weeks, what was going to happen? Eventually Jerusalem and its sanctuary was going to be what? Destroyed. When was that fulfilled? In the year 70. And then it describes what it's like. The end of it shall be with a what? With a flood. Till the end of the war, desolations are determined. So you have the word desolations are determined. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Goes back to talk about the final week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And now it refers once again to the destruction of Jerusalem. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes what? Desolate. Does Matthew 24 refer to the Roman armies as the abomination of desolation? Absolutely. So, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. Now these verses describe the trampling of what? Literal Jerusalem in the year 70. It is significant that the words abomination and desolation appear in Matthew 24 and verse 15, and they reappear here. It is probable that Daniel 9, 26 and 27 not only refers to a future desolation of literal Jerusalem in the year 70, but also to the subsequent desolation at the end of time. This seems to be the case because the plural form desolations means more than one desolation. Thus, plural form implies more than one desolation. If this is the case, then the first part of Daniel 9:27 depicts the first desolation of literal Jerusalem in AD 70, as does the first part of Luke 21, verse 24, while the second part of Daniel 9:27 describes the desolation of what? Of spiritual Jerusalem that Jesus described in the second part of Luke 21, verse 24. Matthew and Mark, now listen carefully, Matthew and Mark referred to this period as the what? As the tribulation. A word that Jesus used to refer to as what? As the trampling of Jerusalem by the Gentiles. So in other words, the tribulation is what? The trampling of God's people by the Gentiles, by the papacy. This interpretation fits very well with the fact that Jesus blended the description of literal Jerusalem and spiritual Jerusalem. You have two statements here. The prophecy which he uttered was what? Twofold in its meaning. While foreshadowing the destruction of Jerusalem, the literal Jerusalem that is, it what? Prefigured also the terrors of the last great day. And incidentally, there's something more here. How many stages does the papacy have? Two. What is the first stage? The 1260 years. What will be the second stage? When its deadly wound is healed. Did the papacy trample upon Jerusalem during the first period of its dominion? Yes. Is it going to trample upon Jerusalem, spiritually speaking, in the second stage? So we're to understand that really the second stage of the papacy is actually a continuation of the first with the period of the deadly wound in between. But it's the same system persecuting the saints of the Most High. So when Ellen White says that this prophecy is twofold in its meaning, she's not only referring to the destruction of literal Jerusalem and then, the attack on God's people at the very end of time. Included also is the idea of the tribulation during the 1260 years. That's what she says in Desire of Ages. Here's another statement, Great Controversy, page 36. The Savior's prophecy concerning the visitation of judgments upon Jerusalem is to have another what? Another fulfillment, of which that terrible desolation was but a faint shadow. In the fate of the chosen city we may behold the doom of a world that has rejected God's mercy and trampled upon His law. By the way, do you remember in Daniel chapter 9, verse 26 and 27, you have the two words, abominations, desolation. Does the book of Revelation refer at all to abomination of desolation regarding the end time? Notice our last text, Revelation 17, verses 4 through 6, and verses 15 and 16. Who does the harlot represent? Well, the harlot is Babylon, but who is Babylon? The Roman Catholic papacy. Right? So, let's notice the end time application of this. Revelation 17, verses 4 through 6. Speaking about the harlot, the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of, there's one of the key words, abominations, and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Is that what happened during the 1260 years? The trampling upon God's people? Yes. Was it the same harlot? Yes. Was she filled with the same abominations? Yeah, only this is the end time dimension. There was one during the 1260 years. This is the last one. It continues. When I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. And then notice verse 15. What's going to happen to the harlot? Because of her abominations, what's going to happen? She will be left what? Desolate. Incidentally, do you know what the abomination of desolation means? It means because of the abominations, desolation will come. That applies, by the way, to the United States. We won't get into that now. Verse 15, then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these will hate the harlot, Did France hate the harlot at the end of the 1260 years? Are the political rulers going to come up with hate again? Yes. So it says, and the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these will hate the harlot and make her, there's another key word, desolate and naked, eat her flesh and burn her with fire. By the way, that's a way of saying that they're going to really be mad. Even further, the last paragraph, 2 Thessalonians 2 explains that there would be a long period of apostasy before Jesus comes. True or false? Well, let's go to 2 Thessalonians 2. We only have a very, very short couple of minutes here, but let's go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Were the Thessalonians expecting Jesus to come in their day? Yeah, in 1 Thessalonians, the Apostle Paul said, we who are alive and remain shall be caught up. So they say, oh, we're going to be alive because it's those who are alive and remain. So Paul writes a second epistle. He says, no. He said, you misunderstood me. Jesus is not going to come until a long period of apostasy in between. Notice 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3. Let no one deceive you by any means. For that day, that is the day of Christ's coming, will not come unless the falling away comes first. The word in Greek is unless the apostasia comes first. And the man of sin is revealed. Who is the man of sin? The little horn, the beast, the harlot, the king of the north, the abomination of desolation, the Antichrist. Doesn't matter which name you choose. And what is he going to do? Is he going to attack God? Yes. Who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God where? Did the little horn attack the sanctuary? Did he usurp the position of Christ? Yes. So it says the man of sin sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So were you able to follow what we studied? We did it quickly. But the good thing is it is written. So you can go back and you can look at it, you can study it, you can read all of the verses that we've included here. So we have discussed the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth trumpets. And we're still not ready to go to the sixth trumpet, because we still have to study Revelation 10, but before that, Daniel 12:4.